got ready to jump on this live with this conversation with Uzoma, or between Uzoma and I'm very excited about. So just to, sort of situate us and give us a little bit of a grounding and what today is all about. The session is called Igniting a Pan-African Renaissance, New Methods for Shaping Our Realities and Ourselves. And that's a lot of words to just say that it's kind of a celebration and an exploration into what it looks like when people of African descent globally center ourselves and our rich heritages, the diversity of them in our lives, in our work, in our practice, in our play, in everything that we do, and how that can not only enrich us and enable us to live more liberated and authentic lives, but also expand sort of global contributions to complex problems that we're all facing. And so to give you a little bit of an introduction to Ijeruka is the platform hosting this webinar, and also the course that it's connected to, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Ijeruka is a Pan-African digital learning community. We create online courses and virtual learning experiences with visionary African and Afro-diasporic minds across different generations, disciplines, and Uzoma is one of them, a recurring teacher and contributor to our programs. And I am Anwulika Okonjo. I'm the founder of Ijeruka. I'm also a social innovation strategist, a community organizer, very passionate Pan-Africanist. I like to say a steward of radical hope, and someone who is deeply interested in the idea of engaged citizenship, and how that's linked to how our ability to engage with the world around us and feel interested and able to contribute to society, to contribute to progress, and to take command of our own lives is directly linked to what we know about the world. And so that's a little bit more about me. I'm going to pass to Uzoma now, and then we'll come back to the course and then just kind of jump into the conversation.
Okay, thank you, Anwulika.
Uzoma, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I was saying, thank you, Anwulika, for, the invitation and just constantly extending or inviting me to be part of the world that you're dreaming into existence. It's always a pleasure and a joy. My name is Uzoma. Uzoma means the good road. And I think that is the philosophy that I try to live out in my practice. So the good road, or the way is good, the road is beautiful, all of that. And my practice is intimately concerned with, I think of myself as a professional dreamer. So it's intimately concerned with dreaming a future that serves us, an Afrocentric future that serves our highest interests and ideals as Africans. I think that is at the crux of the work that I do and the thinking that I do, and just the life that I live, really. And then I also think a lot about technologies, like Afrocentric technologies. I describe myself as an Afro-technologist. And so in this future that we're driving towards, what are the technological innovations and the tools that we use to, navigate our world. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Uzoma. Okay, so just to give you a little bit more insight into cultural architectures, building Afrocentric realities. This is a course that is beginning on June 11th. And this conversation is directly tied. We're going to be talking about a lot of the themes and touching on some of the lessons that we'll be exploring in that program, but also a little bit beyond that as well. Cultural architecture is something that Uzoma and I have been dreaming up for, I think, about a year now, right? Ever since we kind of started talking to each other and got connected, it's sort of been building over time. And so it's really exciting for both of us to be sharing this this program with you and inviting you all into this this evolving conversation. So the course is designed to empower us with the tools to not only dream, but also architect and actively construct new realities where people who are African and descendant diasporic identities are not only acknowledged, but celebrated as the bedrock of societal progress. So we'll talk about the, the role of culture in society and how it shapes our collective reality and how we can be active participants in shaping its evolution. The culture is not something that is static or stagnant, and it is something that is dynamic and evolving, just as we are. We'll look at how people of African descent have shaped and continue to shape the world, exploring our rich histories, philosophies, practices, and mastering the art of infusing and cultivating Afrocentric sensibilities in everyday life. So whether that's, your work or your just, the spaces that you design for yourself and for others, many different things. And at the end of it, the goal is to empower you to think of yourself and actually be a cultural architect. So knowing how to leverage and identify and value the unique cultural assets within your community, your heritage. We have some really cool sort of exercises planned and lessons planned where we'll really get to go deep into our own personal histories and explore things like Afro-aesthetics and our conceptions of beauty. And there's so many different things. I don't want to go too much into it right now, but you can learn more about the actual course on the website. So I'm going to share the link in the chat. Yeah, I kind of just want to jump in. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows what Afrocentricity or Afrocentrism is. I don't know about you, Uzoma, but I think like I have, before kind of doing proper research into this, I had just a general kind of definition in my head. And I'm sure a lot of people, when they think of sort of Afrocentrism or whatever, you're probably thinking like dashikis and maybe what I'm wearing, like these type of, there's certain things that we kind of conjure up in our mind, maybe a fist raised, but there's actually a much deeper history and sort of theory that goes behind it, a legacy that has been left for us by our predecessors. So Afrocentricity, as it's typically defined, contends with our main problem as people of African descent, which is the unconscious adoption of Western worldviews and their attendant conceptual frameworks. Malefia Asante, who's one of the proponents of Afrocentricity, describes it as a theory of agency, which I absolutely love, that positions people of African descent as active creators of their realities. They say that, as a theory of agency, it's the idea that African people must be viewed and view themselves as agents rather than spectators to historical revolutions and change. And to this end, Afrocentricity seeks to examine the aspect of and the subject place of African descendant people and our historical, literary, architectural, philosophical, economic, and political life. It's essentially a compass guiding us towards liberation, and true Afrocentricity must permeate through everything from our walking, our running, our loving, our eating, our working, and so forth. And so I really love this quote by Toni Morrison, which says, "I stood at the border, stood at the edge, and claimed it as central. I claimed it as central and let the rest of the world move over to where I was." And I feel that essentially just kind of encompasses everything that Afrocentricity is about. So with that in mind, of standing at the border and letting the world come to where we are, I want to ask you, Uzoma, to begin this. What was the moment that like you kind of recognized that the world was not centered around um, maybe the way your particular heritage, your way of being, the things that you grew up with, and maybe actually give us a little bit more of a background because oops, sorry. Let me know if you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Maybe also give us a little bit more of a background, like where you're from, what are your roots, and what was the moment when you realized that, like, okay, well, this world isn't actually oriented towards me,
Mm.
and what did that feel like?
Hmm. I feel like I've had many moments of that realization. It feels like almost like the running, like an underlying, just something that I'm very aware of as an underlying thing in my
Right.
life. Maybe that's why I'm called to this work. Um, but yeah, as you asked this question, I remember. So I was born in Lagos in Nigeria. Um, I grew up in Port Harcourt in Nigeria. My hometown is Owerri, and I've lived a good part of my life in Abuja, in Nigeria. So I'm like I've been around within the country,
Mhm.
and I've experienced I think different parts of Nigeria. But this
Yeah.
thing that I'm about to say sort of like applies to everywhere. I remember, when I was in primary school in Port Harcourt, I just used to be so intrigued by kids who would speak with this like American cartoon accent. You know how they speak on Cartoon Network, like "Hey man,"
Mhm.
like type of thing.
Mhm.
And it was it was almost like it was like a thing. It was almost like our version of what you do to be cool as a child.
Yeah.
Um, and even then, like even from a young age, I just remember like somewhere at the back of my head being like, yeah, no, this is a bit strange. Like, why are we speaking like this? Like, why do we
Yeah.
feel like as kids? Why do we feel the need to like contort the way we speak to match what we are? First of all, why is this even the media that we're consuming? Like
Mm.
why don't we have media that is more representative of who we are? And yeah, so many other instances, like, you know, even me myself, like I remember a period in my life, I think when I was in secondary school, I think when I first started gaining real, like a higher level of consciousness and maybe even Afrocentric consciousness, my
Mm.
definition of progress, I started, I had a blog when I was in SS1, so when I was like 15, and it was called Going Future Forward. And that whole blog was kind of oriented. It's a bit embarrassing to say now, but it was like oriented around like, oh, this kind of thing that this person is doing in Nigeria is similar to what you would find in America. So then it's cool. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
oh, Wizkid is dressing like this, or he has this song that sounds like this, or that sort of thing. Just defining like progress by Western lens, like even for myself, And looking back now, I question where that sort of thinking comes from. I question it because I can see that it's still like a very prevalent form of thinking in our society. Like in Nigeria, we have this thing where I remember a while ago when Anthony Joshua came to Nigeria. When we have people of Nigerian heritage who do very well abroad. Um, they are very like highly regarded at home, and there's this idea that if you want to make it here, you sort of have to make it abroad, and then like your international clout is like, yeah, it's accorded some sort of respect. But yeah, these are things that I constantly question, and I just wonder why, like I love that definition of Afrocentricity as a theory of agency, because when I look at all these things, it's like, you know, we don't feel that agency. We feel that need for external validation. Yeah, I could give
Yeah.
many more examples of this in high school. Like you were made fun of if like the more Nigerian you sounded, almost, it wasn't cool to sound
Mm.
Nigerian.
Mhm.
We could be quite mean about it. So there's so many examples. You know, But to balance it, I think, or maybe not to balance it, but the flip side of it is that I think now we are collectively slowly coming into like a consciousness of, okay, like, you know,
Mm.
we actually don't need all this external validation. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think this is timely.
Yeah, I can totally relate to well, first of all, like, yeah, why are we in Nigeria and Port Harcourt and Abuja and Lagos and sounding like we're from New York?
Yeah.
How does that make sense? um, and yeah, I totally agree with the sort of the representation, the consumption, the type of media we're consuming or have access to. Something else I was thinking about, like, was a conversation that we had briefly as we were preparing this course, which was about our names. And for me, one of the examples that is very recent, actually, only a few years ago, was I told you I was interning at Terra Culture, which is for those of you who don't know, it's a really famous a sort of cultural center in Lagos. They put together different plays, and they have an art gallery. They sell all sorts of books written by African authors and things like that. And so I was interning there, and a coworker of mine like asked me one day, like, "What's your name?" And I was like, "You know my name. My name is Anwulika." And he was like, "No, but what's your English name?" I was like, "I don't have one. I don't have an English name." But it's really common for people to have an English name. I mean, I'm the only one of my siblings who doesn't have one. But my parents just didn't feel the need to give me one. But he was like, "No, you have to have one. Like, it's not good that you don't have a Christian name, that you don't have an English name." And I was like, "That doesn't make sense. Like, look at where we are. Like, how is it that we're in this place?" And my name, Anwulika, which you said what your name means. Mine means like joy is the most important thing. It's a powerful name. It's a name that like was gifted to me, and somehow that isn't enough because it's not English. It's not Christian. And so that for me is an example of like an attempt by my parents to, instill in me cultural confidence, which I want to get to, cultural confidence by giving me a name that is directly related to the place that I come from. And then having that sort of come up against cultural hegemony, or just these very sort of pervasive ideas that Christianity or Western sort of ideals are the thing to aspire to and the thing that we measure ourselves by. And I think there are other examples of that. Like, I can think of my cousins who grew up in the U.S. and have their roots there. I think about the ways that, and even my friends who are, maybe African American, and, they come from a particular background, and maybe even categorized as like ghetto, or just so many things, ways of kind of making us feel insecure about who we are, and where we come from, and the value that those places hold. And so coming back to this idea of cultural confidence, which was instilled through the naming, and naming is a very important thing in Igbo culture, which you and I both are. What is, as a counter to like, when was the moment where you realized that like this world isn't oriented towards you? What are the things, or what is something that like has instilled in you a sense of cultural confidence? And what does cultural confidence mean to you?
I think the meaning is on the tin. Being
Mm.
confident in your culture, owning it, finding agency within it. Um, it's a term that exists, or it's a term that we're creating because it's not a given. It should be a given, but in the
Yeah.
world that we live in, and the way like this globalized culture is being constructed, it's not a giving. There is a
Mhm.
center and there are others, and yeah, which is why that Toni Morrison quote is very brilliant. Um, for me personally, cultural confidence, yeah, comes from many things. I think first of all, it's a divine gift that I've received. It feels like a gift from God, like, and it feels very related to what I feel is my calling, which is, kind of like at the center of the conversation we're having on this course, like maybe shifting the center back to, back to us and where we are. I wouldn't be able
Mm,
to show up to that work if I didn't have cultural confidence of my own. So yeah, it feels very much bestowed by God, bestowed by the divine, but then also very much nurtured by people around me. My
mm,
mom, who's a very proud Owerri woman, um, and would own it. My dad as well. My family generally, largely speaking. My dad. One of my earlier memories is him saying, just going back to the thing about names and not having an English name. I also don't have an English name, which, like you said, is rare. All my names are Igbo. And I
mm,
remember him saying when I was young that English people don't have Igbo names. So why should his Igbo kids have English names? That always stuck with me. I was just like, wow, that's a flex, because
mhm,
it's rare. Um, I think, yeah, yeah. The more I think about it, it feels like cultural confidence for me feels like something that what we would say in pidgin is a follow come. Like, when something just like you buy, like something that comes, the original parts. So it feels like something that just came with me.
mm,
I've always, or for a long time, I've gravitated to African literature, like, I'm like I watch a lot of football, but I watch a lot of African football. Like, I even used to follow the
mm,
Ethiopian league at one point, and that was very weird to, like, even my Ethiopian friends. But I think it's just like part of my makeup that I'm interested in who I am and where I'm from. Um,
mhm,
but yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's nature, but it's also nurture, and I don't know where one starts and the other ends. And so yeah, coming back to this course, I think that we're definitely trying to nurture cultural confidence, and I think that even with people who may not be aware of it in their nature, or who maybe have come from places where their cultures have been so repressed, like in the case of many people of African descent who are living in majority white spaces. I think this course can
mm.
help to find where in your nature that cultural confidence exists and sort of like bring it to the front, the foreground. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And something, a good point that was raised that is also just something that I think we think about a lot is, you know, for me personally, um, my cultural confidence, like you said, it is nature. Like, I don't know, I've just always had this thing of like, like I just really care about where I'm from. I want to know, like I've kind of lived all over the place. So maybe it is the environment. Like when I was growing up in South Africa, there was a lot that was sort of encouraged in terms of learning about our history. This is not too far post apartheid, post the end of
Mm,
apartheid. And so there was a real effort to make sure that like we valued and took pride in Africanness and in diversity and in understanding that. But I think also from my family and from just looking at the world around me, like there was a lot that um, made me curious at the very least. But I
mm,
think the cultural confidence for me has developed over time, and this is why I like where we say like it's not just nature, it can be nurtured. And even if someone didn't nurture it in you when you were young, you have the ability to nurture it now.
yeah.
Because I think for me, like a lot of that has come from understanding things not just at a surface level. So not just looking at like Ankara print or watching a
Mm,
TV show and feeling like, oh, they look cool. And I see a comment from Sewa in the chat about like, how a lot of American culture is drawing from African American culture, which is considered to be cool and all these things. And we do see that now. We even see the rise of like continental Africa, our contributions to the entertainment industry and things like that. Like there's a lot that is sort of that is kind of praised from our communities, but I think when they lack the depth, or when we lack depth, and when we lack understanding of what those things are rooted in, those kind of aesthetics are rooted in, we can kind of miss the mark for developing sort of deep-seated cultural confidence that has the ability to transform us and the world around us. So, for example, learning why I'm allowed to like greet. Oh, why I have a specific greeting that I greet my father with and my family members with, and why that greeting exists, right? Or why we wear certain clothes, or certain titles are bestowed, or just simple things like about the ways that we interact that really get you to sort of dig deeper into what are the histories, what are the values beyond just the practice of it, beyond just like what we're seeing on the surface, beyond the sort of expression of it, the external expression of it. Where does this actually come from? What is it pointing towards, right? And I think that's where the idea of dynamism and our ability to sort of evolve culture comes from as well. Because if we understand like the core values and histories that these practices or aesthetics or whatever these sensibilities are rooted in, then we know what to preserve and transmit versus what we can maybe shake up a little bit, disrupt, transform. So yeah, just do you have any thoughts on like
Yeah.
go ahead.
I think, yeah, what you say is really beautiful. I think there's an interesting thing about intention in there as well, and maybe this connects to what Sewa shared in the chat, which is, why are you, speaking of cultural confidence and just like interest in your culture, like why are you interested? What is your
Mm-hmm.
intention? I think I see a lot of people, mostly from the diaspora, but also even at home, people who are like Africans, or Nigerians or whatever, who are almost appropriating their own culture for the purpose of appearing a certain way. It's always
Yes.
still there's always still a gaze that I think they are trying to, or I see people trying to appear nice under. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think it's something to be careful about. Like, even me speaking, like there is, yeah, you can really just take the quote unquote cool parts without any sort of criticality, and just because you look like just because I'm Nigerian, I can get passed for appropriating my own culture. But yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make is, just that thing of intention, like why are you doing what you're doing? And that's where this question of cultural confidence comes in, because I think there's a need to divest from like hegemonic systems totally, to be able
Mm-hmm.
to not feel the need to appear a certain way to a certain group, or yeah.
No, I totally get you, and I think because what you're talking about is like we don't want to become caricatures, basically, right? Like
Yes.
we don't want to erase the substance that comes with you know who we are and how we express ourselves and all these things, right? And actually, like stuff which is the idea of holding your lid, just in terms of actually being disruptive, like closely linked to cultural confidence and a deep understanding of ourselves and where we come from, our heritage, and all the wisdom that's available to us as well, beyond maybe just our own specific locality. Um, in order when we sort of tap into that, the next step is then like this thing of like, okay, well, we can use that as a way to disrupt, right, to
Mhm.
be a glitch in the system. And that's why it's really important to talk about cultural confidence, to talk about all these different things, cultural architecture, which we'll come back to actually the definitions of those in a second, but in relation to power. And we've already mentioned the idea of hegemony a few times, but I'd love for you to kind of share a little bit more, and then I'll share about your thoughts on power in particular, and narrative, and just what is the thing that we're kind of like up against at the moment as you see it, and what is the place of honing your glitch so people understand it.
I think the first, and we talk about this in the course, but the first thing to know is that everything is fiction, and the world that we live in is like somebody's story or some group of people's story. The way society on a global scale is configured is is story, it's narrative, and the certain fictions that we've come to adopt as almost truths. I think if we know this, then the next step is understanding that we are also agents, like agents of storytelling, and we have the agency. Back to Malefia Santi's definition, we have the agency to define our stories. This for me is at the foundation of the work that I do, as like, like world building, dream work, thinking of Afrocentric futures. It's owning that agency to be like, okay, this is the reality we live in presently, but what do we want it to look like? And how can we like invest in that imaginative dream space and sort of like bring it to bear in the present day in just how we move and how we show up. Um, so yeah, power comes from narrative, power comes from story. We have two options. I can either accept the dominant narrative as our own,
Mm,
and tailor our lives to conform to it, or we can choose to opt out in little and big ways. And that's what it means to be a glitch. um, Understanding that your own path, your own story is at odds with the dominant story, the capital letter S story. And the honing in honing your glitches, developing the ability to counter the dominant story in all the places that it does not serve you, and
right.
to tweak it or to change it or to completely subvert it, or I don't know what the word is, to completely do this to it.
Yeah. Okay.
You
Yeah.
so that works. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You're an artist and a technologist. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I know a lot of the time where we're talking about this and it can seem like, oh yeah, that's cool, but like, okay, what does it actually look like in real life? In my real life.
Mhm.
So yeah, how are you glitching?
I think my answer as an artist might not be my answer in real life. But
Okay.
I think my real life benefits from the artistic practice. So I can
Okay.
answer the two separately, briefly.
Yeah.
Um, and I can speak for myself. So as an artist, one of my long-standing projects, which will be long-standing probably forever, um, is called the Ministry of Dreams. Used to be Nigeria of My Dreams, and the goal of that project is to have we have like these dream workshops or conversations with different groups, different like communities, or even just like individuals, where we challenge and we invite people to think about what a progressive Nigeria looks like, feels like, for them and their family, their community, their friends, to really like
Yeah.
invest in that imagination, because that's not something that it's not common. We're used to sort of like getting by, that we never really take the time to imagine. So we have
Yeah.
these conversations. People say, oh, in my dream future, this, that, and then we turn them into, the goal of the project is to turn these into visual depictions of what was articulated, so people can experience them. Um, and the whole thesis is, what would it do for your psyche, if you could step into this like dream space that you're articulating and experience it on a first-hand bodily level. Like, how does
Mm,
that affect how you move through the world? And so now going to the second part of the question, which is daily life and how I show up as a glitch in daily life. So it's trickier because, and that's why I even appreciate this course for myself. It's trickier because, daily life, I can say all this stuff, I can talk about, oh, dream, like imagine, but sometimes there's fuel scarcity and I have to go and queue at
Yeah.
the filling station. Sometimes there's no power. Like in Nigeria 2024, we still don't have stable electricity. Like all these things are present in my
Mm,
reality. But I think what helps is it's also really like a question of like faith and spirituality. Like what helps is knowing that just knowing that I actually feel like I live here, like I live in Nigeria, but I'm not here. And I think we've spoken about this before. Like I'm not
yeah.
mentally and spiritually in all of the problems that are going on because I've somehow it's not delusion. It can feel like it, but it's not delusion.
Yeah.
I've just somehow detached myself from the story, again from the dominant narrative, and I've
Mhm.
sort of like created my own story and found ways to preserve and protect my own peace. And this whole thing is about like peace and fulfillment, this whole conversation. So I found ways to, protect my own peace, whether that's through my faith, my spirituality, and my beliefs, whether that's through my community and other like minds that I engage with, whether that's through showing up in in kindness with kindness, in a space that is so um yeah, we're kind people, but our communities are lacking in kindness just because of the
Mm,
anyhow, this is my opinion, you know.
I get
So
you. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like, and the art thing helps because I can go to, like, I'm constantly engaging with what do I believe, what do I see, what do I feel, how do I imagine this place can be. So that now forms kind of like the basis of my mind as I move through this space. And so when I come back, I'm still there almost. Like I'm still operating like I'm there. And it just helps with like my day-to-day interactions. It can get annoying, or like it can get frustrating at times, but you breathe, you understand that that's for a moment, and you kind of just keep moving. Nap if you need to nap, cry if you need to cry, but
Mm,
just you stay. That's where this idea of staying the energy of your dreams comes from. Like you're
mhm,
consistently and constantly tethered to that which you see, as
mm,
opposed to that which is, and that's according to the Bible, that's the definition of faith. Like faith is substance of things hoped for, not seen. So it's
mm.
it's constantly like living by faith, not living by like sight or what you see around you. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. What sticks out to me about what you said is like when you're talking about the real life, like immediate problems in Nigeria, and the narrative, right? Because there is a narrative here. And regardless, like we always talk about like, the global picture, right? And what's happening at scale because of colonialism, because of imperialism, because of white supremacy, all these different things, right? There's like a bigger kind of these forces that we kind of think about. But then in our own particular context, there are also stories there. And some of those stories serve us, some of those stories don't. Some of those cultural, or maybe like social imaginaries and behaviors that we've come to see as normal don't necessarily serve us and are not actually the truest expression of who we are. But because of the conditions of like just life, government, whatever, they become normalized. So like when you're talking about Nigeria, I think about like, I always think about like, the politics of imagination. And one thing I was exploring was, this idea of kind of Nigerian anyhowness, right? Where here anything can, it's kind of like American exceptionalism, like that's a narrative,
Mm,
that's a particular thing. Here we have kind of Nigerian anyhowness, which is like anything can happen, right? And it kind of robs you of the ability to feel security. And I think also sometimes it prevents people from actually embodying their agency to to be engaged citizens, to shape their reality, to command their lives. Because if the narrative is like, this is all out of our control and it's all random and like anything can happen in this country, like you never know, then we are robbed of that sort of like personal agency, or we kind of relinquish it in a sense, right? Because it becomes part of the story that we are not in control. But then when I look at, again, like going back to my own roots, and I look at like the Igbo philosophy or the Igbo cosmology, like we have, we're very big on the idea of like being a master of your own fate, right? And of the leader being the person who is most capable in society. And if you're not capable, then you're out of there. Like if you're not showing your contributions, you're a servant leader. If you're not contributing and you're not doing your job, then you're out of there. So if that's something that is literally part of like the spiritual framework of my people, then how can I make sure that it is reflected in the way that I engage with the state? So like, that's where it goes from like just studying cultural heritage to then, okay, this is tied to my real life, because my value system, my indigenous value system tells me that I need to make my voice heard when my leader, whoever is the head of my country or whatever that looks like, is not doing their job. And that like I am, or like, for example, there's a narrative that women are secondary to men, for example. But then I look at like where I come from, again, the histories, the first leader of my, the kingdom that I come from, Ogwashuku, was a woman. That's a suppressed history, but I dug into it and all this stuff. And luckily, a family historian, a member of my family is a historian and found this out. And it's like, okay, well, actually, women in leadership is fundamental to who we are. And so this something isn't right here. Something's gone awry. And I actually have a reference point for that. And so that for me is like where there's a bridge between just a general interest and curiosity in our heritage or in our value systems and all these things, and the bridge to what does that then require of me in everyday life. So yeah. Okay. I wanted to also talk about okay, yeah, so just speaking to this, actually, we have kind of touched on a few different things. What is cultural architecture? Because this is something that we kind of, I guess, came up with. And okay, maybe I'll give the definition, and then we can just talk about it a little bit more. So, 1 second. So, cultural architecture, it maybe kind of sounds like literally like the way that you build a space, and whether it's reflective of like, the culture or whatever. I don't know what you're thinking in your head, but here's what it actually is. So it extends beyond physical spaces and aesthetics. It's a blueprint for our social frameworks, essentially. It's the ways that we shape social structures based on our cultural influences, social norms, and the ideologies of our societies. It's about crafting systems, institutions, and environments that reflect and support the identities and values of our community. And so as cultural architects, our task is to consciously design these elements and to sustainably to design these elements and sustainable ecosystems that honor our past while also paving the way for a world where our knowledge thrives locally and globally. And so in close association to that, so this was something that like we've begun to develop, but something that you may be more familiar with, or people listening may be more familiar with, is the idea of world building, which for us, cultural architecture and is very closely related to the concept of world building. So world building is the detailed crafting of societal narratives that can profoundly influence how individuals and communities perceive and interact with the world around them, including how they understand themselves and their potential. So world building is dynamic and ongoing. It's about filling the structures created by cultural architecture with life and meaning. And so a good way to kind of think about the distinction between these is that cultural architecture is like constructing a theater, and world building is like writing the play that unfolds within it. So if you think about like the art, the law, or actually maybe a better example of that might be if you design an educational system, that would kind of be the cultural architecture part of things, and then incorporate Afrocentric philosophies and histories, and the content that is taught within it is part of the world building. So I want to ask you, like, how do you see yourself as a cultural architect? And one of the things that we are explore in this course is like the different types of cultural architects that they are. Like, we're not all playing the same role. We don't all have the same sort of like skills and responsibilities or even callings. So what is your specific calling as a cultural architect, and what does world building like look like, mean? Just getting a little bit deeper into that.
So in 2020, amidst all the Black Lives Matter protests and of course COVID, there was a lot of talk on social media about how we show up in the revolution, like what role we play in the revolution. And I remember coming across this like framework that helps you identify your role in the revolution and what sort of like part you play. And I think there were 9 different roles, but I remember that mine was something along the lines of dreamer, storyteller, and also something like caregiver or something like community, something
That's
related.
interesting. Caregiver. Okay.
Yeah. I think the thing like identified your top 3 and then got you to like find it was very cool. That is actually one of the resources that I'm looking up to add to the the course, the list of resources. But yeah, like knowing that was helpful. It was reaffirming because I already felt that way, but it was also helpful to like have some sort of focus. Like, okay, this is the thing that we are all like aspiring towards, and this is kind of like how I can show up within that in a way that feels tailored to my biggest strengths. So yeah, I think that's something that we are aspiring on the course. One of the first exercises that we will do. Can I talk about the stuff that's on?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I didn't know if, but one of the first like, exercises that we will do is creating like a world building license, and also identifying like doing a similar exercise to the one I just described. So getting everyone to sort of identify their own space within this larger conversation about cultural architecture and reclaiming like
Renaissance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, what is your role within the Renaissance? So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I for me, I think my roles are builder, for sure. Visionary. Thank you. And I don't know what the last one was. I think those are the main 2. Those are the things that always come up. Sometimes community organizer, although it's interesting because it's not like, I wouldn't have always thought of myself that way. Actually, no, weaver. It wasn't an organizer, it was a weaver. A friend of mine actually gave me the name Ada Gamba, which means like woman who represents her people to the world. And so I really love that name. And so, one of the things, this is one of the things in the program that I'm like most excited about is that a lot of the time we are going to be looking at like things that are beyond us, but it's so deeply rooted in getting to understand ourselves and like our own, unique gifts and ways of thinking, and the fact that like, yeah, we're talking about things that maybe are lost, that need to be preserved, that need to be, whatever. But we're also talking about like our own ability to be like shapers of the universe. You know what I mean? And in very kind of like tangible and grounded ways, and ways that hopefully feel really empowering. And so, we're almost coming up on time. We still have a little bit more time to kind of talk a little bit more, but I wanted to touch on two things. One is the final week of the program is towards plurality, expanding Afrocentric influence globally. So what role do you think that, Afrofuturism or Afrocentric perspectives in particular can play in envisioning a future where not only people of African descent thrive, but everybody thrives? And I'm throwing these questions at you. Feel free to throw some at me as well. Totally
Yeah.
fine. But I do love that you brought this concept to me, so I am going to bring it up now. The idea of cosmological equity. So can you share more about like what is this idea of cosmological equity and how it relates to moving towards plurality, expanding Afrocentric influence globally?
Yeah, I think the big tragedy of the world is that like not everybody is given an equal seat at the table, or not everyone is given the chance. The problem with like cultural homogeneity is that we um, rely on one set of narratives to the detriment of others. But
Mm.
in that final section of the course, we're asking what it looks like
Ooh.
and perspectives and just way of being in the world is honored in its for their different strengths and weaknesses.
Mhm.
There's a beautiful proverb. I'm going to not get it right, but it's from, I think I read it in a Chinua Achebe novel. I'm not sure which one, but it talks about masquerades, and yeah, it's like masquerades in a dance. Like when the masquerade moves in the dance, you have to move with it to see it.
Mm.
You're here in this one spot and it's here. You have a good perspective on it. When it shifts
I
and goes that
get
way, you have to move as well to be able to see it. So just yeah, I came across that proverb in relation to this same conversation about how, because I think the narrator was talking about how the colonialists came and just like imposed their worldviews and values on our way of being without realizing that they needed to move to see the masquerade move as well. They were
it.
judging the situation from the one point that they were standing at, in the Ilo, the village square, watching the dance. So yeah, cosmological equity is that idea that we all have something to offer. Um, Western civilization has many things to offer. Like we're not here as
Yeah.
like in this conversation be like, no, it's not about that.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
they've
Mhm.
given the world so much. Unfortunately, they've taken so much as well by just like repressing other forms of being. So this whole conversation in this course is about resurrecting those worldviews that have been suppressed, but starting from our own place and space within the world. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
How do you relate to that question of plural what
Plurality.
plurality as
Yeah.
well?
Um, how do I relate to it? I relate to it in exactly the way that you described. That we have to be able to. Um, we can't appreciate things from a single view. I see that Oma put the proverb in the chat. The world is a grand masquerade. You can't appreciate its entirety from a single view or a fixed point. And you know, there's so many, we're kind of existing in one dimension right now, but there's actually multiple dimensions to the world, to the universe, right? And I think you're right that, you know, Western philosophy, worldviews, and all that have ways of being, have contributed a lot. But for example, I think about like the sort of philosophy of Ubuntu, right? Which, you know, Panache Chibumati, one of our teachers, translates as a person is a person through other people, right? Whereas like Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Those are two very different ways of understanding the world. One is my personhood comes from me and my head, and you know, that's it. And the other one is our humanity, our personhood is shaped through other people and is validated through other people, right? And so we are fundamentally social beings. That is like something that I think has been neglected in a lot of what we see today. And there's so many different examples of that. Another is I've been studying Igbo intellectual thought and just trying to, like I said, dig deeper into, you know, Igbo philosophy and my own, I grew up hearing things from my family and all that, but I wanted to kind of take it upon myself now. And one of the things that we taught, one of the things that it teaches you is that ancestors are part of the world, right? That they're not like people who die are not just gone. And so when we think about like the beings that exist, you know, around us and who is what is influencing us, even if it's just like the immaterial knowledge that they leave behind, the resources, things like that. I think we don't always think about that. Like we don't always think, first of all, we don't always think about other living beings, right? And we don't always try to care for them, despite the fact that like Afro-indigenous philosophies may actually really cherish, you know, and see as equal to humans, other life forms, right? Like other like parts of nature. But because of like Christianity, for example, which does say that sort of man presides over the earth, we kind of have lost a little bit of, or a lot of, our reverence for nature. We've lost our reverence for ancestors and ancestral wisdom and thinking multiple generations ahead, like legacy, longevity, the immaterial things that are passed down. And I think we see the consequences of that today. And so for me, plurality and plurality that encompasses Afrocentric, African, Black worldviews, experiences, ways of being, is a way of opening us up to just a lot more wisdom. Like, I'm not saying we have all the answers. I'm not the type of person that's going to be like, oh, indigenous people, like, they're the saviors of the universe and they're gonna, you know, all we need to do is listen to indigenous people because then we'll have figured everything out because they, you know, somehow just know everything, which I think is another form of sort of like tokenization, right? Homogenizing indigeneity and then lauding it as like, oh, they, you know, they're gonna fix everything if you just listen to them. Like, no, that's not actually how it works. What we're calling for is plurality. We're saying that we need more ideas, we need other ways of thinking, and we need to collaboratively and collectively respect, honor, and value these contributions enough to engage with them on their own terms and figure out what helps us and what doesn't. And so a lot of the time it's like, exactly like Malefia Asante said, we are sort of objects or spectators to historical revolution. And, you know, this invites us to be its proponents, which I think we have been as well. Like, we definitely have been as well. But I think it's just kind of expanding the opportunity space for that. And in this case, because Ijeruka is a platform that caters directly to people of African descent, so it's not necessarily, I mean, there are other conversations about like what other people do to make sure that a plurality of voices are heard, but this is about what we do, right? Like, what are we doing? How do we understand ourselves and what we, if we are at this table, or if we're saying we're going to build another table or sit on the ground, as Aisha Dochi, another teacher, says, like, do we know what we're gathering for? Like, do we know what alternatives we have at our disposal? So yeah, that's what that is for me. And yeah, I want to close on this question, bringing it back to the idea of a Pan African Renaissance. Well, how do you envision the Pan African Renaissance taking
Mm.
shape in your lifetime? Will it take shape in your lifetime? Actually, I want you to answer that. Like, it will take shape in your lifetime, and what does that look like, and what is maybe the continuity of it beyond your lifetime?
Do you know that I don't even think about like the timeline of this. I think
Mm,
I'm more and more I'm trying to be detached from it because it's too big to constrain to time, I think. And
right.
also thinking about time can breed some sort of pessimism or stress or
Mm,
anxiety because like, I only have how many years, you know.
right.
Um, and also going back to the idea of like Igbo cosmology, like and Allah more like spirits land, spirits in this cosmology of spirits.
Thank you
You
for
know,
actually naming it, like, giving it the Igbo name.
yeah, and
Yeah.
like we are our people understand that, you know, your life is in cycles. So your time on earth is only a fraction of your time generally.
Mm, yeah.
That's also reflected in like it's reflected across like different spiritual traditions. So like I think that consciousness and that understanding breeds like a detachment from time when you think about some of these big questions and things that we're trying to realize. So
Mm,
how I think about it, I'm here to do my bit, you know, going back to the our role within the Renaissance. I'm here to play my part. Um,
mm,
I'm here to do the dreaming and all of that. You're here to do the building and the weaving. We'll do it to the best
mm,
of our ability. We'll move the conversation forward in whatever little or big ways we can, and then we'll we'll dip. And you know, someone further down our lineage, our cultural and intellectual, and also like emotional lineage, will continue the work. That's what it's supposed to be.
yeah.
So yeah, that's my thoughts around time in terms of what it will look like. Um, I don't know. I would say what it will feel like because my
Okay.
relationship to it is an affective one. I think
Okay.
it would feel like you know those days. This might be a reach, but this is just what came to me. It's like a weekday. Nah, it's like it will feel free. Um it would feel loving. I think when I
Mm,
look around me in the cultural context that I live in today, in the Nigeria of today, there is an absence of love, of kindness, of communality. Going back to something you
yeah.
said earlier, which I wanted to talk more about, but I don't know. I wanted to ask you more about, but I don't know if you have the time.
Yeah. Go for
Um,
it. Go for it.
yeah, like the disconnect between our um what you were saying about our indigenous or ancestral or relationship to agency, and like what you said about your chi, like you are responsible for your fate, right, versus
Yes.
like culture of like anyhowness and resignation that we see today. um
Mm,
that is like there's a fundamental disconnect. One of the biggest disservices I think of colonialism to us here is like this disconnect between our lived reality today, contemporarily, and where we are coming from, like our traditional like ways of being. The term I use is borrowed reality. Like we're living in a borrowed reality. So there's
yeah.
like they're like divorced from one another.
Yeah.
So I say that to say that those values of kindness, of love, of communality, of Ubuntu, togetherness are embedded in who we are, is in our cultural DNA, but it doesn't show up in how we show up in this
Right.
modern day. So the Pan-African Renaissance, the African Renaissance, to me is just like it's like a Sankofa energy. It's going back to some of
Yeah.
those liberatory values that we had. There were many. Not saying they were all our values were liberatory, but there were many that were founded
Mm.
on love. Like this thing of love, this thing of like connection is, I think, at the heart of who we are as people and how we constructed our being in the world, you know. And it's just, I just think it's lost. Like it's lost in this pool of capitalism and borders and us versus
Mm.
them. It's just lost, and we need to find it again, really. So yeah, that's what it
Yeah.
will look like for me. It will look like a finding again, like, and there will be that sense that like I can go to. We have an issue. You see it in glimpses here in Nigeria, like just how you can randomly banter with strangers or just like go to the
Mhm.
market and haggle, and everybody's kind of chill in a way, but it needs to
Yeah.
come back to the fore, you know. But yeah, how does it look like to you? And what do you think? Going back to the question I wanted to ask, and I know we're out of time, but like
No,
that
no, it's
dis-
okay. Yeah.
yeah, that disconnect between modern day and um, uh, tradition, how we showed up traditionally. How do you like? Do you see that, and how do you reconcile that? And then your question about the Renaissance, like what does that look like? And also the question of timeline. A lot of
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start with the Renaissance question, because to me it's kind of simple. It's this. This to me is we are already creating the Pan African Renaissance, and to me it's like a renewal of consciousness, and of relationship, and yeah, that's like you said, the Sankofa spirit, go back and get, but also when I think of Renaissance, I think of pioneering. So it's like it is roots, but it's also I'm going to link it back to the course roots because we have one of our weeks is called, one of our lessons is called roots and roots. So the roots in the ground, and then the roots that we take to get to get forward to the future, and through which
Mm,
ideas travel, and through which like culture, values, etc., are sustained. So for me, it's like a renewal of consciousness. It is this confidence, and it looks like people not just, and you see this in the Ijeruka community, like people who are not just kind of looking at these external metrics. So whether it's GDP or like what's in your bank account, all these different things that we're told are the ways that we should measure our success, our well being, and instead are looking very much inwards and
mm,
are starting with themselves. And, progress is a sort of like revolution in terms of what we view as progress. The
mm,
progress isn't, like you said, like time is this thing that like, you know, is not necessarily, it's not linear. It's not like, this is just a small fraction of our, what we will do with ourselves. Like we're only here in this form for a limited amount of time, but our contributions last well beyond that if you do believe in things like being an ancestor, or even if you don't, just in terms of the things that you leave behind. And so, and so, what we do with that, and how people value time and how people value community and contribution, I think, is
mm,
already starting to shift. And I think we'll only see like more of that, this re-education, re-indigenization, and a general kind of just building of community with all the technologies that we have at our disposal. In
mm,
terms of yeah, so the funny thing is, to me, I was reading Ali Masri's. I have it in the back here, like Masri's book about. I've forgotten the name of it now, but I'll find it and I'll share it with everyone. But he basically talks about like how you know we often say that colonialism destroyed things, and that we've been colonized and we need to decolonize and all that. But then when you actually look at it, colonialism was such a small part of history. Like our actual history, if you look at like the whole timeline of our history, just in this linear way, it was such a small moment. And so, yes, it had a massive impact. But what I see is that, and yes, we do have these distortions. We do have like the struggle to, to remember sometimes. But also, what I see is that it hasn't been destroyed. It really hasn't. And like you said, um, it's like people will speak with the American accent, right? For example, or actually, no, maybe a better example of this is with spirituality. That like a lot of people had to convert to Christianity, or in Nigeria, so like Christianity and Islam are sort of 50-50 basically. And the reason for those conversions, particularly with Christianity, was that you get access to resources, to education. There was an ostracization. There were things. There were real kind of pressures that came with it, and also a lot of the people who, like the early kind of missionaries, acted in a sense as like almost kind of like social revolutionaries. And what they did was that in destroying or attempting to destroy and belittle indigenous religions and spiritualities, they also kind of belittled and demeaned and, in a sense, got rid of, or tried to get rid of, the social cohesion and the principles that came with that. Because for in a lot of our cultures, the spirituality, the cosmology is directly tied to the actual rules of society, right? That the basis upon which we interact, the just basic social contract. It's not just about spirituality in terms of like, evangelizing people and all that. It is part of the social fabric. And so what you're doing when you undermine the spirituality is also saying that some of these ways like don't matter, right? Like the collect, like let's say for example, there's like, we value collectivism, that kind of gets eroded. Or we value the contributions of others. Like we want to hear the contributions of others when we make decisions in society. And if that is seen to be rooted in any sort of like indigenous kind of thinking, that gets eroded. And so, but what I've seen is that even in the face of that, when you look today, people will go to church and then still like do, there's just certain ways that we like practice. There's just certain ways that we practice even like Christianity, or we'll go to church and then they'll go to like like let's say like a masquerade festival, or they'll still venerate their ancestors, or there are these things that are living side by side with each other. And so I see it as like there's a disruption, and it's something that we have to overcome through education, through this renewal of consciousness, but it's not lost. And so like, that's the thing that gives me hope, is because I see it. And Nigerians are very stubborn people. I think of Black people in general, we're very resilient and very stubborn people. And so, even with the suppression, the intent to kind of destroy, which we cannot take for granted, we have maintained and sustained ourselves, and we sustained our cultures. And I think we have to give ourselves credit for how much of a good job we've done in the face of the things that we faced. Because there are people who have been wiped out. There are literally cultures that no longer exist. And so, yeah, I think we really have to give ourselves credit for that. And I think like I was writing earlier today about an article about like just thinking about this idea of what it means to be visionary. And for me, it's like patience is a big part of it. And I think like sometimes we really want to see things come to fruition in our lifetime. And we just kind of have to accept that that's not necessarily always going to be the case. But like you said, we're ancestors, We have, generations that are coming after us, and there are glitches that we can already see right now. So let's kind of like hone in on those. And if it's a crack, if it's a fissure, we make it a huge crack. And little by little, we, reclaim our space and we open up plurality again. So, yeah. All right.
Very inspired.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're a little bit over. So I appreciate everyone who's been listening. And yeah, just thank you so much for joining. If you want to watch this back, it is on YouTube. It's been live streaming to YouTube as well. So you can watch it back on there. We'll also share it after this. And don't forget that this is all tied to our upcoming course. So if you want to like be a part of this conversation, if you want to learn some really cool things and yeah, just get to know Uzoma and I a bit more, then please join us for Cultural Architectures Begins on June 11th. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting some of you and seeing your beautiful faces. And yeah, thank you, Uzoma. Any final words?
Thank you, Dalu. Yeah,
Dalu.
it's been beautiful. I'm excited for what we're doing and just like the world we're contributing to birthing. So thank you.
All right. Thank you too. All right. Dalu, everyone. And yeah, we'll see you when we see you. Bye.